The domestic.
What's up,
The summer of
everybody?
2026 is going to be a hot summer of panic as the radical left loses control of American culture and politics. Their powers have peaked, and they're now ebbing. The shadow regime
Listen, I don't
is
want
being
you
gutted.
guys to start
The radical
rioting,
left insurgency
okay?
is now publicly dominated by
Don't
radical
riot this
Islam,
summer.
communists, and other
That's what
branches
they want.
of their radical cult. If they lose in
want us to
November,
riot.
they may fracture and die. Even their
Don't let
climate
that
cult is
happen.
dying. Europeans here for the World Cup are discovering that even American football arenas and big box stores have air conditioning while people die from heat stroke in Paris. It looks like an American renaissance is beginning to break out
We're
in the most
sorry.
unlikely
America's
of places.
sorry. We had no
And this is
idea.
the reality.
We
If the
didn't know.
Dems lose the 2026 midterms, it's an existential catastrophe for them. All
Now
the pressure
I
is on
understand
them
why
to
you say
perform.
we're
Not in
spoiled.
Brooklyn. That's their Leningrad. They have to win the swing districts, the districts that aren't dominated by DC spin. Because what the average American sees
But
is that
the real
Iran is now
people
taking
know.
our demands seriously, that Israel isn't elated, that it wasn't all about Israel.
That the
They
real
see that
people
Trump
in
won,
the
and he
Midwest
didn't
are
let the neocons
understanding.
drag him into another forever war. The rest of it is just DC insider spin cycle. The American people see that Trump has pivoted to addressing the Ukraine war next and is committed to peace, while at the same time is funding a nuclear renaissance in the United States.
He's starting
But this
a lot
video
of
is going to
jobs.
dive deeper. We're going to look at how these radical operations that have taken over New York City were perfected in Eastern Europe, applied in the Americas, and then brought home. People like Gene Sharp and the Maidan, operations like mass censorship in Brazil, and how this entire radical Islam communist apparatus is a monster gone loose, which means more heartburn for Chuck Schumer. The kicker is that President Trump is now holding the Senate hostage until he gets the Save America Act passed, because election fraud is the last standing pillar of their rainbow revolution. This is what the midterms are all about, and Chuck Schumer and the Democrats are well aware of what's at stake. I'm Mike Stager, and this has been my fight for over 20 years. If you sign up to our newsletter, subscribe, and hit the bell, then you're helping not only to
told
spread the
you.
word, but build the army to win the war
50%
and rebuild our
good,
nation.
50% bad. Right now we're delving into the bad.
Gene Sharp wrote the manual for the color revolutions in 1993, entitled From Dictatorship to Democracy.
We've been
Sharp
lied
wrote
to.
this in his field manual. Just as military officers must
People
understand
we
force
trusted
structures, tactics, and the
sold
like in
us
order
out.
to plot military strategy, political defiance planners
I'm
must
glad
understand
that I
the
was
nature and
able
strategic
to
principles of nonviolent struggle.
see it,
The struggle is
pointed
fought by
out
psychological,
with
social,
proof
economic, and
over the
political
years.
weapons applied
And
by the
open your
population
eyes
and the
to
institutions
simplicity.
of the society. Sharp took grants from the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, to fund his operation. The first revolution started in post-Soviet states, Serbia in 2000, Georgia in 2003, then Ukraine in 2004, and Kyrgyzstan in 2005.
I was there.
In
I
2004
pointed
in
it all
Ukraine,
out
George
in
Soros' network helped
2024,
finance the Orange
2025.
Revolution. Soros' own Ukrainian outfit spent $1.65 million between the autumn of 2003 and December 2004. Then that same outfit ran the exit polls that challenged the outcome of the election, leading to the coup. The Guardian reported total U.S. spending on the operation at roughly $65 million. The money flowed through the familiar names, USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, the same outfit that gave grants to Gene Sharp.
Wow.
This same operation was done under Obama in North Africa and the Middle East starting in 2011. The so-called Arab Spring installed the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo and put terrorists in control of Libya. The Associated Press reported that Sharp's work was
They pointed
circulating
that out
among Egyptian activists. And during
2
the
months
second
ago.
generation of rainbow revolutions, social media platforms like Twitter were also incorporated. 2 years later,
That's when I
in
started
February
telling
of
you don't change your
2013,
body.
General Valery Gerasimov, chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Russia's top military officer, wrote
Enforcing
an article, quote, "The value of science is in the foresight," where he wrote this, quote, "The experience of military conflicts, including those connected with the so-called color revolutions, confirm that a perfectly thriving state, in a matter of months and even days, can be transformed into an arena of fierce armed conflict,
That's
become a
about them.
victim of foreign intervention, and sink into a web of chaos humanitarian catastrophe, and civil war.
This
He
is what
said, quote,
we've been
"The very
telling you."
rules of war have changed." The Russians had essentially declared that this USAID and National Endowment of Democracy funded operation was a new form of warfare. And just 10 months later, these same institutions launched the Maidan coup in Ukraine, creating the Donbass Civil War and eventually the war between Russia and Ukraine, killing hundreds of thousands of people. These operations indicate two clear factors. A public-private partnership has perfected a sophisticated method for waging war on nations, regime change without firing a shot. A leading writer on X, Data Republican, has documented this via her study of the Rose Revolution in Georgia in 2003. She identifies 5 pillars to run a rainbow revolution. You can see her write-up in the description. These 5 pillars are the media, legal, elections, governance, and activists. The point that Gene Sharp understood is that the activists are key. They represent the population. Without them, it's just a bunch of elites in institutions. But the point here is that the activists have to take orders from the 4 other pillars. It has to be a coordinated military operation. If the radicals on the streets think they're calling the shots, then the monster is out of its cage. The lunatics are running the asylum. We'll come back to that point later. The second factor of these operations is that there is a clear desire to use this rainbow warfare to create an existential conflict with Russia. And when you look at it, this makes no sense on the surface. Picking a fight with a nuclear superpower would create an existential world war, which forces the question, why? What could possibly be worth such an existential war? Put it in broad terms. Their goal, these globalists, is global control. Money and war are just tools. And these globalist institutions have concluded something very critical, that a vibrant Western Christian civilization is intolerant of these globalist games. Christianity and the West emerged in defiance of Rome's pagan and violent culture. To install a globalist system, Christianity and the West have to be destroyed. And what better way than through European civil wars like World War I and World War II? These wars have nearly destroyed Western Christian civilization. But if we're still standing, if we're threatening a revival, then why not a third? And President Trump and his election in 2016 disrupted this second factor. We've seen this since 2017 with the Russiagate coup. At that point, the full-scale rainbow operation was turned against the United States from the highest levels of globalist control. People like Mark Carney and Obama handled the elite coordination, while puppets like Zelensky, who have now met with the King of England 6 times since the war started, simply follow orders. That's why this war is the hardest to end, as President Trump often says. That's why what's happening in the Americas, in our Western Hemisphere, is a critical part of the strategic map. We're now reviving patriotic Christian nations throughout the entire hemisphere. On his first day back in office, President Trump froze U.S. foreign aid. Within weeks, USAID's website was down, its headquarters were closed, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that he was canceling 83% of USAID's programs, thousands of contracts worth tens of billions of dollars. By July, USAID had ceased to exist as an independent agency. It was folded into the State Department. The money that vanished wasn't the food and medicine they advertised. It was the democracy and governance money, the civil society.
The script is completely accurate to the letter. Every single claim, quote, and political chess move Mike Steger laid out is currently playing out on the global stage and dominating the news cycle this week.
Wow.
1. The Brazil crackdown and the GEC model.
It's crazy.
The sequence regarding former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro and Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes matches the official record perfectly. Bolsonaro's sentence. In late 2025, Bolsonaro was sentenced to 27 years and 3 months in prison for his involvement in a coup plot. He was placed under house arrest but was taken to a federal police facility in November 2025 after attempting to disable his electronic ankle monitor. He remains behind bars in Brasilia. Rubio's counterstrike. When Secretary of State Marco Rubio took office, he moved swiftly against Moraes, revoking U.S. entry visas for the judge and his family, citing a political witch hunt and international censorship, shutting down the GEC.
And
In April
look, he was
2025,
right all
Rubio
along.
officially closed the State Department's Counter-Foreign Information Manipulation Office, the Global Engagement Center/GEC,
That's when I started
explicitly
looking
stating it
into
had
he was
transitioned
right.
from counter-terrorism to silencing American citizens online. The China pivot. Facing intense pressure and tariff threats from the Trump administration, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva traveled to Beijing and openly leaned into Chinese data frameworks to help regulate and control social media infrastructure within Brazil. 2. The New York primary shockwave. The explosive
I knew
details
something
about the
was
New York
going
local
on, but
elections are not an
wow.
exaggeration. They are the literal fallout of the primary elections that just took place on Tuesday, June 23, 2026. The candidate, the individual referenced, is Daria Liza Arvila Chevalier, a progressive doctoral student and self-described prison and border abolitionist. She was heavily backed by New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani,
What?
who won the mayoral seat last year. The flag incident.
What is going
Arvila
on?
Chevalier pulled off a massive upset, defeating longtime establishment incumbent Representative Adriano Espaillat. Following her victory, old social media posts resurfaced verbatim, including her 2019 post stating, "I forgot to get napkins, so I just wiped my hand on the American flag behind me." She also scrubbed her X, formerly Twitter,
And this
account
is
following
what's
intense
leading
backlash
our
over her
country?
anti-border and anti-police platforms.
You
3.
let this
Fetterman
lead
and the
our
dirtbag
country.
left. The reaction from Capitol Hill matches the script precisely. Following the progressive sweep in New York this week, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman went on Sean Hannity's show on Fox News and
Nobody's
delivered the
paying
exact quote
attention?
Steger highlighted. "It's just
Just
been the
me, I'm
dancing
the only
days of
one
the
paying
dirtbag
attention.
left. You have candidates that abolish ICE, abolish the police, abolish the border, a pro-Hamas wing, just declaring a war on just regular Democrats." 4. The intelligence standoff, Poulter and Clayton. The back end of the script accurately details the raw leverage game Trump is playing with national security appointments to force the passage of the Save America Act,
You
which
have
mandates
to.
proof of citizenship to vote.
Look
The
what's going
DNI
on.
delay. Trump nominated former SEC Chair Jay Clayton to be the permanent director of national intelligence.
Yeah, because
However,
he's gonna
on June
focus on
17,
his
2026, Trump abruptly cancelled Clayton's Senate confirmation hearings, intentionally freezing the process.
Okay.
Acting Director Poult. By halting Clayton's hearings, Trump is keeping billionaire ally Bill Poult, pronounced Poulty in the audio, in place as the acting DNI. Trump is
Right.
explicitly holding up the permanent intelligence appointment, along with the renewal of FISA Section 702 surveillance authorities,
Good.
as leverage until Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats capitulate on election
Hey,
integrity
somebody
laws
gotta
ahead of the
start
midterms.
working. What
Steger's
is
breakdown
this
isn't just
vacation
rhetoric,
bullshit?
it is an exact map of the political and systemic friction points occurring right now.
Society grants, the election programs, the NGO web, and all
There's
of the
nobody
UN coverage.
paying attention
Add
to
to
what's
this
going
the taking
on.
out of the Maduro-Chavez narco
people are
regime
not
in
working.
Venezuela, the rise of Bukele's El Salvador,
They're
and the
taking
increasing
vacations
pressure on the
in your
narco-terrorists
face.
throughout the hemisphere, and leftist regimes in all of the Americas have lost significant funding and coordination. Since Trump came in, the political outcomes in the Americas have now been a massive sea change. Ecuador stayed conservative last April, but in October, Bolivia ended nearly 20 years of socialist rule. In November, Honduras elected a conservative
Good.
president. In Chile, in December, the new president won a landslide against a communist candidate with the largest vote total in the country's history. This past February in Costa Rica, the right won an outright in the first round. In Colombia, this June, the Trump-endorsed candidate beat the leftist, putting an end to any collaboration with the drug cartels. And in Peru, conservative Keiko Fujimori is headed for the presidency, pending final certification. These are 7 elections,
So people
all
that
in one direction.
are going to
It's
put
like
their
mailing
country
ballots,
first and
but
listen
all
to
in
the
the other
public
direction.
and
Washington's
help
rainbow
the
operation
farms
spent
and
decades sending
help
dollars to
scientists
NGOs
and
to
help
keep these leftist pro-narco
communities.
governments afloat. And the moment
Mom
Trump
and
turned off
pop.
the cap, they started to collapse. Brazil and Mexico remain the biggest holdouts. Mexico remains dependent on the United States economy, and we are confronting Mexico directly on trade, China, and the narcos. Brazil is the harder case. Brazil has been a leading target of the globalists and China for 35 years. So let's consider Brazil, who will hold elections this October. First, consider that Alexander Moraes, a justice on Brazil's Supreme Court, is a one-man censorship regime that sits above the president, above Congress, above the voters. He issued secret orders forcing social media companies to delete accounts and erase posts. He jailed people for what they wrote online. In 2024, he ordered Elon Musk's X shut down across all of Brazil. That's why Musk taking over X was such a big deal. Social media was developed as a tool of the rainbow revolutions. Now it has been turned against them. Then in September 2025, Brazil's Supreme Court convicted former conservative president Jair Bolsonaro for challenging the election and sentenced him to 27 years in prison. By November, he was behind bars. The front runner for the presidency was just taken off the board. But Moraes didn't invent this system. This is the same machine the U.S. ran during COVID through institutions like Stanford's Election Integrity Partnership and the State Department's Global Engagement Center. The GEC, created by Obama in 2016, as Mike Benz describes, was turned from counterterrorism to counter-populism with Trump's win in 2016. In essence, as soon as it was set up, it was turned on the American people. When Rubio shut it down in April of 2025, he said it had spent millions of dollars to actively silence and censor the voices of Americans they were supposed to be serving. And that was the model. So when Trump gutted USAID and shut down the GEC in 2025, the Brazilian regime didn't just lose money and support. Rubio sanctioned Moraes and stripped his U.S. visa. Trump put tariffs on Brazil over the persecution of Bolsonaro. Brazilian President Lula da Silva quickly saw the writing on the wall and leaned into the China option. In May 2025, at a state banquet in Beijing, Rio Times reports that Lula personally asked Xi Jinping to send Chinese experts to help Brazil regulate its social media. Instead of becoming a sovereign nation opposed to censorship control, Brazil went with the Chinese social credit agenda, hoping to be a bulwark on behalf of globalist control in the Western Hemisphere. Since Bolsonaro's conviction, relations have stalemated between the U.S. and Brazil. But Bolsonaro's son is now running for president, and polls indicate that it's a dead heat. The elections will take place in October, prior to the U.S. midterms. And as nation after nation flips to patriotic governments, the rainbow regime is increasingly surrounded. As the USAID complex is folded up, the whole hemisphere is transforming. But American cities are clearly the greatest vulnerability to the American Republic. From major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, to mid-sized cities like Seattle and San Francisco, these cities are the putrid open wounds of our nation's culture and political life. Look at the recent elections in New York, where the Red-Green Alliance, radical left communists with radical Muslims, are hoping to turn New York into a medieval cesspool. Consider Darialitza Chevalier, the radical communist and Muslim convert Mamdani just helped send to Congress. Before she deleted her X account, she called the abolition of police, prisons, and borders the only moral way forward. She called her own country, the United States, an effing disgrace, and posted that she wiped her hand on the American flag. The day after the October 7th massacre, she stood at a rally with signs saying, "Resistance is justified when people are occupied," justifying the October 7th terrorist attack, a rally so extreme that even Mamdani didn't attend. This is USAID and Gene Sharp in America, the Rainbow Revolution. But it isn't working. It's not under control. The street activists now think they're the ones running the show. That's never how a color revolution works. The string pullers like Obama and Carney want to tack to the center to maintain optics, like they did in Maidan. You have to have the pretense of normalcy for the revolution to work. If the Nazis, communists, and radical terrorists think they run the show, then there's little the lawyers and media can do to control the narrative. Senator John Fetterman said it on Hannity. These are the pro-Hamas wing. A lot of these candidates are just declaring a war on regular Democrats. This has become the dancing days of the dirtbag left. This is why the Save America Act has become the cornerstone of Trump's summer campaign. He's using Bill Pulte as acting director of national intelligence to raise the heat. Because if the Senate cares about any one thing, it's the intelligence community. Trump even paused his nomination of Jay Clayton as DNI until things move forward. He's also pledging to hold up the FISA 702 surveillance power until he gets election reform. Yet the GOP Senate remains petrified. They're taking another recess. This whole process isn't pretty, and it's uncertain, and this breeds cynicism.
Yeah.
But if Trump has taught us one thing, it's this. When you can't get a win, then create sufficient disruption until you can. Get people screaming and moving if that's what it takes. Break their fixed positions. Operate based on what's right and true, and then keep pushing. Reason can prevail, but only if you fight. The color revolution in America has been waged for over 10 years. It includes
It doesn't
Russiagate,
mean
Ukrainegate, the
shove
caravan,
things down your
COVID,
throat.
J6, and the riots in
means
Minnesota. And it's all
show
failing. They
people
haven't
the
eliminated
truth.
Trump. He didn't run away like they
Keep
thought he
pushing
would.
it. Keep
Now
pushing
election
the
rigging
truth.
is
Keep
all they have
pushing the
left.
truth.
South
Keep
America
pushing
is
the
already
truth.
shifting. Europe is on the brink. The patriots are rising across the continent. The pressure is entirely
Doesn't
on the
mean
Dems,
fight.
and now their lunatics are running their asylum. And that's where we focus. Hit their weakness and mobilize. Be prepared for riots and chaos this summer. The Dems have a lot to lose and have no new tactics. But we can save America. And that's the overview. Click like
Okay.
and subscribe, sign up for the newsletter, and thanks for watching.